All right, guys, welcome back to part three of these tutorial videos. For those of you that have just tuned in, please go back and watch part one, which is our HIRA, part two, which is the HSEMP, the management plan slash program. Otherwise, this third video is not going to make any sense to you. All right, but guys, welcome to the measuring and monitoring part of the risk management process. So we're going to continue with our story that we've started right from video one, the paper production scenario. For those of you that have in fact watched, let me just highlight what we have done so far. We have done the HIRA, we've done the 3 safety risk assessments, the 3 health risk assessments, and the 3 environmental assessments. And then from there, in part 2 of the videos, we drew that information from the HIRA into the management plan. And just as a very quick recap, there was our safety management plan where we set ourselves objectives. We set ourselves a measurable target. We implemented a control based on the hierarchy of controls, and we gave it to a responsible management person, and we gave that management person a set due date. And we did the same for our health management plan, as well as our environmental management plan. Now we need to go back and check. And this is where we're going to put together, ladies and gents, a measuring and monitoring plan, or as some folks call it in industry, a measuring and monitoring program. Same thing. All right, so what we see there is the blank template. And when you come into the NOSA colleges for your exam in part B, as I've highlighted in the previous videos, part B of the exam paper is strictly a case study. It's more of a practical part of the exam paper where you've got to formulate a HIRA, a management plan, and then bring it through into the final measuring and monitoring plan slash program. So you will be confronted with a blank template where we insert the reference, same reference that has run right throughout the HIRA, the management plan, into the M&M, as we call it, same risk. Then we're going to identify a specific monitoring activity, how often we're going to perform that monitoring activity, who's going to be the responsible person, and the documented record name that the monitoring activity or the monitoring process is actually recorded on. So our job in the exam is to fill in the blanks. And you can use the same template after Samtrack back in your workplace to be able to monitor your risks. Right, so let's have a look at the first example, safety. And as you're familiar with, there is our safety 1, safety 2, safety 3, and the same safety risks. It all links back all the way to the top here. It all links back to our HIRA. Same risks from our HIRA into the management plan. There they are there. And same risks brought into our M&M. So what we're now going to look at, ladies and gents, is the monitoring activity. In your Samtrack course content, in your module 7, you would have seen a table. And on that table, it's got lots of different ideas of different safety monitoring activities, lots of different health monitoring activities, and the same for the environment, many different types of monitoring activities. In industry, you can apply as many monitoring activities that are deemed necessary to monitor that risk. In fact, in industry, you'll actually be putting more than one monitoring activity. You'll be putting several different types of monitoring activities for that particular risk that you have got in your workplace. For the purposes of Samtrack, ladies and gents, we are just looking for basic concept, basic understanding. Like your management plan, where we just wanted one control. For our M&M, we are just looking for one applicable monitoring activity. The monitoring activity that you're going to identify, it must be relevant to your risk. All right. So that's also very important to pay attention to your chosen monitoring activity. So in this particular example for safety 1, You can see here my monitoring activity. I want to conduct, or you could say I want to perform a planned job observation, PJO, or also known as a planned task observation, PTO, same thing, on the employees that are handling the used blades. Now, the reason why I want to perform this type of monitoring activity, because if I take you back to my management plan, let's just jump back up a few slides here. Can you see my safety one? Okay, so we set the objective, we gave ourselves a measurable target, but can you see my control here? I said in my controls that I wanted to conduct on-the-job training with the employees on the correct safe handling of those used blades. So now that the employees have gone to the training manager, they've done their training on how to handle these blades correctly, how can I monitor this? How can I ensure that the training was a success? So this is where now, going back to the M&M, I want to actually conduct a planned job observation, an observation on those employees that are handling those blades to ensure that the training that we had just done with them was in fact a success. For safety two, my monitoring activity is to perform housekeeping inspections on the stacked logs in that concreted bunded area. If I take you back to the management plan, look at my control here. My control was to construct that concreted bunded area. Now that it's been constructed and all the logs have been stacked in there neatly, safely, they're not going to roll, how can we monitor this? If I take you back to the M&M, I'm going to monitor it by conducting or performing a housekeeping inspection. For safety three, my monitoring activity is to conduct a pre-start / or a pre-use inspection on the guards. What guards am I referring to? Well, let me take you back to the management plan. There in my management plan, I said we're going to install fixed steam guards over the vessels to reduce the contact with the steam. So how can I monitor this? How can I monitor that those guards that have now been installed are in fact effective? Well, I can monitor that by conducting a pre-use inspection or a pre-start inspection, however you want to word it. So, ladies and gents, the monitoring activities that you're going to be identifying are not only relevant to the control measures that you implemented in your management plan, but they are relevant to the risk that has been identified not only in the HIRA, in the management plan, but the same risks in your monitoring program, your measuring and monitoring program or plan. You see, so they've got to be relevant. And for SAMTRAC exam purposes, ladies and gents, what the assessors are looking for from you, like I said before, is just that basic concept. Just one monitoring activity. In industry, you'll find, let's say if this was your safety risk, you could probably find several different types of monitoring activities for that given risk. But we're just looking for from you one monitoring activity. Okay. So now that we've got the monitoring activity, we move on to the next column, the frequency. Now, frequency basically means how often. How often are we going to perform that identified monitoring activity? It's very important, ladies and gents. Frequency of monitoring, it can actually be legislated. This is why it's very, very important for you as a health and safety practitioner, to know what the law says in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations, because you will find there's a lot of mention of monitoring in our legislation. So when it comes to the frequency, we've got to be in line or guided by what the law says in terms of frequency. Now, not all monitoring activities are going to be mandated by law. So if you've identified a monitoring activity that is not in fact mandated by law, this is where you would actually identify the frequency of that monitoring activity based on industry best practice. So again, from an assessment point of view, ladies and gents, there is a bit of discretion exercised here. As far as I'm aware, I cannot find anywhere in our OSH law where it talks about how often a planned job observation must be conducted. So I'm going to base it on, industry best practice, and I'm going to do my planned job observations at least one every week. Some companies, depending on risk profiling, can do a PJO daily. Some companies that are lower risk profiled are 1 PJO every month. So a bit of discretion is exercised here. Same for my housekeeping inspection. Well, if you look at what the law says in terms of health and safety representative, SHE-REPs, we often call them, how often they've got to do a workplace inspection. The law says they must do a workplace inspection at least once every month. That is actually mandated by law. But here, I want to do better than what the law says, and I'm going to do one inspection per week. Okay, one housekeeping inspection on that area at least once a week. Same for my pre-start or pre-use inspection on the guards. It would make sense that we do this daily. Those machines are being used, the dry rolling machines are being used daily. So the guards have now been installed. And to monitor those guards that they are working effectively, I want to perform a pre-start check on those guards. And it is going to be performed daily or before every start up. So we do it in the morning before the machines start. We check the guards. We break for lunch if the machine does stop for lunch. Then before we go, when we come back from lunch, when we return from lunch, we're going to do another pre-start check. Okay, so that's what we mean by frequency. So the frequency links in with your monitoring activity. Then we come to the responsible person, and very much like your management plan, where we're allocating management people, excuse me, this is now who is the person that we're going to be allocating this responsibility to. In other words, who is going to be doing our planned job observation one a week? Who is going to be doing our inspection on this area once a week? Who is going to be doing the daily check or pre-startup check? In your M&M, your measuring and monitoring program, ladies and gents, we can now drop it from a management person identified in our management plan right down to artisan/employee level. Remember, everybody's involved in health and safety. Yeah? It's not just management people. Everybody is involved. So we can drop it right down to artisan level. But, don't use generic terms like employee. Well, which employee? We've got to be specific, ladies and gents, as to which employee is going to be the right responsible person. For me, if I'm going to be doing a planned job observation once a week, that we're going to give this responsibility to the HSE officer, i.e. you. Okay, because you will actually be doing a lot of PJOs in industry. Who's going to be doing this inspection once a week? Well, it makes sense to give this responsibility to the elected and nominated health and safety representative for that department, that area, the OSH representative. This daily check, it makes sense to give this responsibility to the actual machine operators. Okay, the machine operator who's operating that machine to inspect the guards, that person, he or she, is going to be doing that pre-startup check. All right, so we can drop it right down to a supervisor level, right down to a team leader, charge hand, right down to employee level. But be specific, ladies and gents. Don't just say supervisor. Well, which supervisor? Okay, you get the idea. And then the final column, excuse me, is our record name. This is the documented information to verify that that entire monitoring activity was in fact performed. We need proof. The employer needs proof. The management system needs proof that the entire monitoring activity was actually performed. So the record name is in relation to the actual activity that is being conducted, how often it's being conducted, and who's going to be conducting it. So in this particular example for safety one, we're going to be doing a PJO every week. The HSE officer is the responsible person. He or she will document that planned job observation on what is called a PJO register, or, excuse me, a PJO checklist. Same thing. PJO register / PJO checklist. For safety two, that health and safety representative that's doing the inspection on that area once a week, he or she will document it on what is called a housekeeping inspection checklist, housekeeping inspection checklist. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Housekeeping checklist. Okay, because that checklist is going to verify that the inspection was done. And the machine operator that's doing that daily check, he or she will document that daily inspection on what is called a pre-start or pre-use machine guarding checklist. It's a documented piece of information to verify that we have, in fact, the machine operator has, in fact, done that check on the machine guarding. So hypothetically, ladies and gents, when we put a full stop there, a full stop there, and a full stop there, if you think about what we've just done, if you've watched the tutorial videos, going back to the HIRA, we identified the hazard, we analyzed the risk with consequence, we've evaluated the risk, we've taken that same risk into a management plan where we've set ourselves an objective, we set ourselves a measurable target, we implemented a control to reduce that specific risk, we gave it to a management person, and we set a due date. We've taken that same risk into a measuring and monitoring plan where we're now going to monitor that risk by identifying a specific monitoring activity, how often we're going to perform that monitoring activity, who's going to be the responsible person, and the record documented information, it is all recorded on. We now have, or we should have, 100% control over safety 1, safety 2, and safety 3. Now, this is a fairly easy example because we've just got 3 safety, risks. Can you imagine now in your workplace with hundreds of safety risks? You can now see it is clearly evident how much work you are going to be putting into managing your risks. And remember, this is an ongoing process. By the time you've monitored these risks, you've got a new process, new machinery, new chemicals, new sets of hazards, new sets of... We know risk changes all the time in the workplace. So your HIRAs, your management plans, your M&Ms are an ongoing, revision of the entire process because of the changes. Let's look at the health examples. H1, H2, H3, same risks that you're familiar with. This time, my monitoring activity, I'm identifying a health monitoring activity. The issue that I had in my HIRA was that dust. In my management plan, I was going to install LEV to extract the dust to try and hopefully minimize the amounts of employees inhalation or inhaling the dust that is in fact resulting in lung irritations. In order to monitor this, my chosen activity is to conduct lung function testing, also known as spirometry testing, with the at-risk employees as per the OREP. Now, you've learned about the OREP in your health module in your Soundtrack. The OREP is the Occupational Risk Exposure Profile. So we're only going to be performing lung function testing / spirometry testing. In other words, it's a form of medical surveillance with those employees that are deemed at risk. Not necessarily conducting lung function testing with all the employees in the paper mill. It's just those employees that have been identified at risk as per the OREP. Same for H2. Here, I want to do audiometric testing with the at-risk employees, again, as per the OREP. Because they're exposed to noise in my management plan, we said we're going to rotate the staff to lower exposure time. It makes sense now to subject those at-risk employees to some form of medical surveillance. So audiometric testing is an example of medical surveillance. For Health 3, I'm quite limited when it comes to ergonomics. But in this particular example for H3, in order to monitor that particular risk, I want to conduct a workplace ergonomic survey. All right. So again, ladies and gents, we're just looking for one applicable, relevant monitoring activity that is able to monitor your identified risk. Frequency, we've got to be careful here. If we look at medical surveillance, like H1 and H2, lung function testing, audiometric testing, you'll actually find, ladies and gents, for those of you that know your regulations, as per our OSH legislation very well, medical surveillance is in fact mandated. It's actually specified in our legislation as to how often the employer must subject employees, like these ones here, that are exposed to these health stresses, to medical surveillance. So you've got to be guided by what the law says in terms of your frequency. I'm going to do something a little bit better than what the law says. I'm actually going to subject my employees that are deemed at risk in terms of H1 to lung function testing annually. Once every year, those guys that are deemed at risk as per the OREP will go for lung function spirometry testing once a year. Same for my employees that are exposed to that huge amount of audible decibels, 105, that are going to potentially suffer noise-induced hearing loss. Audiometric testing is a form of medical surveillance, so they're going to be subjected to audiometric testing annually. My ergonomic survey. Well, to do this monthly, once a week, once a year, for me is a little bit too frequent. We're only really going to conduct an ergonomic survey when there's a change in our ergonomic risks. So if your workplace is not changing in terms of the ergonomic risk, you're not really going to be doing an ergonomic survey that frequently. And knowing the regulations in terms of our ergonomics regulations, there's really nothing in our ergonomics regulations that specifies how often an employer of such workplace should in fact conduct an ergonomic survey. So again, it's based on a bit of discretion here. So I'm going to do this ergonomic survey every 2 years or when there's an actual change in the risk. Responsible person. Remember, guys, medical surveillance is strictly performed by medically trained people, like our OHNPs, occupational health nursing practitioners. So for H1, I'm going to send these guys that are subjected to that dust as per the OREP for annual lung function testing. Who's going to be the person doing the lung function testing? It's my offsite appointed OHNP. If you're lucky enough in industry to have an on-site appointed OHNP, then it will be on-site appointed OHNP. My audiometric testing that's going to be conducted with those at-risk employees every year, that's going to be given to the responsible person, an off-site appointed audiologist, because it's that audiologist that is responsible for conducting audiometric testing. Now, in your soundtrack exams, ladies and gents, if you didn't necessarily use the word audiologist, but you rather use the word OHNP, your occupational health nursing practitioners, your soundtrack assessor will accept that. Okay. But it is good practice to start getting familiar for later on in the industry, specifically medically trained personnel, like audiologists and all the other radiologists, all the other medical titles. My ergonomic survey, we've learned in your Samtrack journey that occupational hygiene surveys are performed by your appointed AIAs. And just as a reminder, an AIA is an approved inspection authority, also commonly referred to as a occupational hygienist. So you could in fact just put the occupational hygienist. Your Samtrack assessor, will accept that. All right, so we've got our 3 monitoring activities, our 3 frequencies, and our 3 appointed persons. And the record name is generated. You can see here for H1, a lung function report, or you could put there a spirometry report. For H2, that audiometric test that's done annually by the audiologist is actually recorded and documented on what is known in the industry as an audiogram. If you said in your Samtrack exam, if you had a very similar risk and you wanted to do the same monitoring activity, if you said there an audiometric test report, your Samtrack assessor will accept that because it shows basic concept. Whilst we're speaking about medical surveillance, ladies and gents, especially for H1 and H2, just a little bit of a tip here. Please refrain from using generic documents, like, for example, the term medical records. Well, which medical records? You've got to be specific in terms of the record name. Medical records is just a little bit too vague. And your Samtrack assessor is probably going to put a question mark and say, which medical record? Okay, so you can see here, I've been very specific. Lung function. report, spirometry report, or lung function test report, audiogram, or you could say audiometric test report. Okay, be specific. And then my last record documented record name, the approved inspection authority that's going to be doing the ergonomic survey every 2 years, or when there's a change in risk. He or she will give you, the employer, the client, what is called an ergonomic survey report. All right, now we've got 100% control over H1, H2, and H3. And then for the final example, our 3 environmental risks, there they are, E1, E2, E3. Same from our HIRA into our management plan, into our M&M. Incorrect disposal of that contaminated wastewater down the drain. Remember, if we just take you back to our management plan, we're going to install a closed loop water recycling system, install color-coded dustbins, wet scrubbers. So to monitor this, I'm going to perform water quality testing. We're dealing with water pollution, so let's test the water before we actually discharge it. Conduct a waste recycling survey, because that was my issue. You know, these bits of offcuts of paper that are just chucked outside, creating aesthetic pollution. We've now put in dustbins and skips to segregate the waste. Let's conduct a waste recycling survey. We're permitting to atmosphere emissions. We put in wet scrubbers we installed wet scrubbers in all exhaust outlets. Let's conduct ambient emission sampling, so we can actually take samples of these emissions as we are permitting to atmosphere. Frequency. I want to do my water quality testing daily. And this is what a lot of industries actually do. Those industries that are creating wastewater, contaminated wastewater, they've cleaned it, they've recycled it, they've put in all their control measures. And before the water is actually, in fact, discharged, they will test it daily to ensure it is within the acceptable range of pollutants. My waste survey, every 6 months. That should be sufficient. Again, a bit of discretion will be exercised, ladies and gents. My emission sampling, based on industry best practice. Those companies around South Africa that are permitting to atmosphere, they are actually required to conduct emission sampling daily. My responsible people, this is where we're going to introduce a lot of our technically qualified, environmental competent people. So my water quality testing that's done daily, this will be given to the appointed hydrologist. A hydrologist specializes in water. My waste survey, environmental specialist. Okay, a bit of a generic job title. In fact, an environmental specialist, ladies and gents, is you. You as the HSE person that is appointed in your industry, you might be the one that's actually doing this waste recycling survey. So you could, in fact, if you put in your soundtrack exam an HSE officer, your soundtrack assessor will give you the mark. That's based on basic understanding, basic concept. And then for E3, we're going to allocate this to an appointed air quality officer. It's actually a person in the industry called an air quality officer. For Samtrack purposes, guys, if you put the environmental specialist, again, your Samtrack assessor will accept that. So your responsible people they are the ones that are going to be conducting this activity based on the frequency. And there's our final record names. The hydrologist that's doing this water quality testing every day, he or she will document that on a hydrology report. The environmental specialist doing this waste recycling survey every 6 months, he or she will document it on a waste recycling survey report. The appointed air quality officer that's doing the emission sampling daily, he or she will document it on an ambient emission sampling report. Okay, we now have 100% control over E1, E2, and E3. And that's, ladies and gents, if you want to pause the video there, for each of those 3 disciplines, that is a very basic measuring and monitoring plan. Just to give you a bit of an idea as to how it is going to be assessed in your Samtrack exams. So we've already spoken about the risk way back in your HIRA in tutorial video number 1. We're going to look at the monitoring activity. The monitoring activity must be relevant to your risk. Okay. If it's not, if you've identified a monitoring activity that's got nothing to do with your risk, for example, we've got there in our safety one, employees handling the sharp blades causing cuts. It's a safety risk. And let's just pretend you went ahead and said, I don't know, conduct audiometric testing on the employees. What has that got to do with cuts? It's a monitoring activity that is completely irrelevant to the risk. So, ladies and gents, if your monitoring activity in your SAMTRIC exam is completely irrelevant, then what the assessor is going to do, like I've demonstrated in the previous video, they will just mark you incorrect for the entire measuring and monitoring plan. 0 marks. So you must pay very close attention to your chosen monitoring activity. Okay, so we've got the correct monitoring activity. Excellent. 1 mark will be awarded there. Frequency based on discretion, based on legal requirements, 1 mark there. The correct responsible person, 1 mark there. And the correct record documented name, 1 mark there. So you can, in fact, actually pick up 4 marks per M&M, which is a lot of marks on offer here, ladies and gents. All right, but get the monitoring activity wrong, and then unfortunately, you're going to lose marks for that particular measuring and monitoring plan. All right, ladies and gents. So I'm hoping that now that you've watched all 3 videos, part 1 was our HIRA, part 2 was the management plan, and part 3 is our measuring and monitoring program or measuring and monitoring plan, that it's going to better equip you with that knowledge, not only to take it into your SAMTRIC exam that is in the NOSA colleges, but also very, very importantly, to take this knowledge, back into your workplace and implement what you have learned. If you do have any further queries or concerns, you want a little bit more clarity on either your HIRA, your management plan, or your measuring and monitoring plan, please reach out to me, ladies and gents, on the Talent LMS discussion forums. You've seen my name popping up there from time to time. Just pop your concern in there. Please understand there's no such thing as a stupid question. The only stupid question is not asking that question. So ask that question, because, my response that I give you will benefit not only yourself, but all the other e-learning students that, may have the same concern that you have got. So don't be shy to ask questions, guys. But thank you for taking your time to watch these videos. I hope they've helped you. I hope they've given you a little bit more clarity, and that you will be better prepared for when you do, in fact, go into the NOSA colleges to write your assessments, your summative assessments. But until then, ladies and gents, good luck. Read the question carefully, especially in part B. Get to know your case study, read it very well. Take your time, ladies and gents, because your part B is your practical side of the assessment. Your part A will be your theory. Part B, which is what we've gone through in your 3 videos, hierarship and monitoring, is the practical side. And there's a lot of marks on offer here. So it's very, very doable. Okay, but just get your hazards and your risks right in your management plan. Get your objectives correct, your activity controls correct, and in the M&M, get your monitoring activity correct. And if you can do that, you should be good to go. But until then, ladies and gents, thanks for listening. Good luck, and we'll see you soon. All the best.